مرحبا بكم مشاهدينا في حوارات السياق. أفادت صحيفة نيويورك تايمز الأمريكية نقلا عن مصادر طبية بأن غارة جوية شنتها الحكومة الإثيوبية استهدفت روضة أطفال في منطقة تيغراي الشمالية مؤخرا أسفرت عن قتل 7 أشخاص على الأقل بينهم أطفال، في الوقت الذي انزلقت فيه المنطقة المنكوبة بالجوع والحصار في جولة جديدة من القتال. عموما للمزيد من المتابعة حول هذا الملف ينضم إلينا رشيد عبدي الكاتب السياسي والباحث المتخصص في شؤون القرن الإفريقي. سيد رشيد، مرحبا بك معنا.
Thank you very much for hosting me.
لماذا عاد القتال إلى إقليم تيغراي؟ من الذي أشعل فتيل المواجهات مرة أخرى؟
A lot of many dynamics and many issues have come together to push I think both parties towards conflict. First of all, there was a mediation process which broke down. The Tigrayan government did not want President Obasanjo, the former president of Nigeria, to be the mediator. It asked for a change of the mediator so that other actors can come in. They specifically expressed confidence in the Kenyan government and also in the United States. The Abiy government decided that they cannot change the mediator. So there was a lot of confrontation and clash between the two warring parties regarding the mediation. Then another major obstacle was the siege on Tigray. For almost 2 years, there has been a siege on Tigray. This siege has caused enormous problems for the people of Tigray. There is no banking service, no telecommunication, no water or electricity for 2 years. Hospitals have run out of drugs. There is serious humanitarian crisis in Tigray. And the amount of aid which has been allowed to go in is not enough. I think the Tigrayans expected that their engagement or the fact that they are now part of a peace process will allow them to actually tell their people that the siege has been lifted. But the siege was maintained. And even more important, I think, to understand is the fact that the siege itself was made into an item for negotiations. And that actually made the Tigrayans to say, we cannot accept the siege to be part of the negotiations. The siege is under the Ethiopian law is criminal. Under international law, it's a form of collective punishment. It is also criminal. And so they are citizens of Ethiopia. So they said, if under all this it is illegal, then we cannot negotiate over an illegal issue. So they had a very strong case on why they needed the siege lifted. While all this was going on, Abiy began to mass troops around Tigray. And there were actually before last Wednesday, there were days and almost a week of artillery shelling and also military movements. It was clear that both parties had no incentive whatsoever for the peace process, and they wanted war to resolve their problems. Now, I think the Tigrayans definitely at some point will have had to go back to war because the expectation of lifting the siege did not happen. So I hope audiences understand that this was a conflict not by one party, but both parties really moving and towards war and not peace.
تحدثت عن أزمة إنسانية عميقة في تيغراي، لكن هذا الملف مغيب إعلاميا، لا أحد تقريبا يغطي الأزمة الإنسانية هناك.
You raised a very important point. First of all, one of the most, I think, important factors to understand about the war in Ethiopia is that it has been fought. It is one of the wars that have been fought in total darkness. The media was completely blocked from covering the conflict. If you go to Ethiopia today to report the conflict, you will be arrested or you'll be deported. All the international media are not allowed to go to Tigray. The few that have been allowed, especially Ni'ma al-Bagir of the Sudanese journalist with CNN, she put out a very excellent report about the war. That despite these very few coverages, overall, we don't know the impact of the siege on ordinary people. And so this is one of the dilemmas I think the international community has faced. We don't know what life really looks like in Tigray. But I can tell you that the situation there is extremely, extremely grave. Just to give you one example, the doctor of the director of the hospital in Mekelle, his name, he's a doctor there, he's a director general. The hospital is called Aider. And he basically said, look, I have doctors who have been without salary for 15 months. And some of these doctors are actually going out onto the streets and begging. Now you can imagine doctors who are so desperate that they are going out there to beg. Hospitals sending patients back home to die because they cannot give them medicines or they cannot even give them food. You know, you have over 1 million people facing malnutrition and starvation. You already have, I think, close to 300,000 deaths of children with malnutrition. So the situation, you know, in Ethiopia, especially Tigray, is extremely grave. And so this picture is only beginning to emerge now, but the causes of conflict are there.
طيب ماذا عن المنظمات الدولية؟ هل تدخلت لمساعدة المدنيين في تيغراي؟
Under the 5 months ago, there was a humanitarian truce that was, you know, and truce, of course, is in Arabic, it's called hudna. So it's a kind of a, you know, a peace. And for 5 months, this hudna did not hold, largely because the humanitarian agencies were not fully allowed back. For example, just to give you one statistics, they say that you need about 100 trucks or lorries of food aid into Tigray every day in order to be able to actually tackle the problem of hunger. Now, the number of trucks that have been allowed to Tigray is a fraction, is a small, tiny fraction of what actually even is under it's less than 20% of the required amount. So the food is inadequate. The government also uses bureaucracy to slow down the aid. If let's say you are from Abu Dhabi and you want to donate food to Tigray, you have to go to the foreign ministry, get documents, you have to go to the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs. By the time you take your truck to Tigray, you will have spent something like a month just chasing papers and signing here and signing. Is a whole bureaucratic nightmare for aid agencies to deliver aid to Tigray. So I think to go back to your question, there has been a bit of humanitarian assistance because of the humanitarian truce, but that truce has now collapsed. We are in a state of war, and that means that it will become extremely difficult for the international community to support or to deliver aid to the people of Tigray.
هل ما زالت إريتريا تلعب دورا أساسيا في أزمة تيغراي؟
You are right that Eritrea is a major complicating factor in the war, but also in the peace, because Eritrea has a long history with Tigray. They are almost the same people. The Tigrayans and the Eritreans are the same people. They are cousins. So, and they have been at war for decades. The first Eritrean war and the Second Eritrean War. The border war was actually between the two of them. So there is also a lot of bitterness between the two. Now, the Eritreans were the ones who actually pushed Abiy Ahmed into the war. And they have been supporting him throughout, but there has been also a lot of international pressure on Eritrea to pull its troops out. Now the Eritreans pulled out some of their troops, but today I am hearing that the Eritrean army is actually beginning another front in the north. So the Eritreans are becoming very much involved again in the conflict in Tigray. And this will be a very big factor for the war to, I think, develop. I hope that countries in the Gulf, especially the UAE, which has influence over both Eritrea and Ethiopia, will actually become involved also and try to, I think, put some kind of pressure on both Abiy Ahmed but also Afewerki to look for a negotiated settlement towards Tigray conflict.
الاتهامات المتبادلة بين الحكومة الإثيوبية وجبهة تيغراي بارتكاب انتهاكات بشعة وإبادة جماعية ضد المدنيين العزل، أين الحقيقة؟ من يقتل المدنيين؟
I think the atrocities have been committed on all sides, but the bulk of the atrocities have been committed by the Fano militia. Fano is an Amhara militia. They are the ones who have conducted the worst atrocities. I've looked at the statistics. They say something like 120,000 women have actually reported rape. They have been victims of rape, 120,000. That's a big number. So there was a very systematic use of sexual assault as an instrument of war. So that is one of the biggest abuses. Then we have seen civilians actually being summarily executed. The first act of war, the Eritrean army occupied a town called Aksum. And Aksum is a historical town. When the Eritrean forces went into Aksum, they actually rounded up people, brought them all together and started shooting them. Human Rights Watch estimates that close to 700 people were actually killed by Eritrean forces summarily on that one single incident. Then there have been also reports of the ENDF, the Ethiopian National Defense Forces, doing something similar, killing prisoners, summarily executing them. Tigrayan forces have also been accused of also committing atrocities, especially rape in parts of Amhara state. They have also been accused of also plundering and also looting and also summarily executing prisoners. So both sides have committed atrocities, but one side, the Ethiopian Eritrean side, have committed the most heinous crimes of the war.
السفير الإثيوبي لدى السودان يبتال أميرو اتهم أطرافا كثيرة لم يسمها بالتدخل ودعم جبهة تحرير تيغراي لتأجيج الصراع في بلاده. ما حقيقة تصريحات الدبلوماسي الإثيوبي ومن هي هذه الأطراف الخارجية التي يقصدها؟
Again, difficult to know what the Ethiopian government is specifically referring to. I think at the moment, Abiy Ahmed's government feels cornered. They are under pressure. If you look at the military situation, the situation is extremely complicated, but the Ethiopian army is not doing very well. The Tigrayans have stopped the advance of the ENDF. The Tigrayan defense forces are now in Amhara state. They are fighting on two major fronts, the Eastern Front and also now the Western Front. This explains why the government is using air power. It's using fighter jets and drones, essentially as a way to cope with the ground losses. So the government is not doing very well on the battlefield, and because they are not doing well on the battlefields, they have to look for external enemies. They have to say, oh, the Tigrayans are getting Sudanese support. You know, Antonov flights are coming in from Sudan to deliver weapons.
إيه، لكن هناك نقطة مهمة هنا. من أين تحصل جبهة تيغراي على الأسلحة لتتصدى بهذه القوة للقوات الحكومية؟
Yes, no, that's a good point. I suspect that first of all, they definitely have kind of a secret channel with Sudan. It is quite conceivable, but there is no hard evidence. I think that the Sudanese are providing military support. We know that the Tigrayans have been part of their military strategy is actually to you know, conduct these kind of strikes in order to get fuel and weapons. So in many ways, they are getting a lot of weapons and fuel and what they need actually from the enemy forces. Just to give you an example, in June 2021, the Tigrayan forces almost damaged nearly 2/3 of the Ethiopian forces. 9,000 Ethiopian army troops were actually detained as POWs. Almost 12 divisions were destroyed. So you can see this is an army that is capable of actually getting a lot of weapons from the enemy forces. So that also gives them the ability to really continue this kind of war without external support. As you said, it is quite possible that Sudan may be providing secrets, you know, secret channels of supplies. But again, there is no hard evidence, and I don't want to, I think, insist that that is the case. But the government usually has many enemies. So anybody who doesn't toe the government line is accused of being the enemy of the Ethiopian state. So I would assume that whenever pressure is too much, the government lashes out and says, you know, we are, there is an external enemy, you know, there is a foreign hand, something like that, yeah.
يقول مراقبون إن أجندة جبهة تيغراي هي في الحقيقة الانفصال. هل تتفق مع هذا الطرح؟
I think the Tigrayan Defense Forces, or rather the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front, the TPLF, which is the government in Tigray, in Mekele, has not come out clearly to say that we are separating ourselves from Eritrea. Their initial assumption was that they could be part of Ethiopia, but there is a strong pressure domestically within Tigray not to be part of Ethiopia anymore. Tigrayans are very small compared to other ethnic groups. They are roughly 8 million. This is tiny compared to other 150 million. They feel that because of the history of the war and the bitterness, they cannot be part of Ethiopia. But the problem is geography. If you look at Tigray, doesn't have an outlet. It's surrounded by countries and it's surrounded by Ethiopia. So it cannot become a very viable state if it decides to separate itself. In order to separate itself, it has to have an outlet to the sea. It has to have an outlet to another friendly state. Now, Sudan could be one such actor. Another possibility is actually a merger of some kind with Eritrea, because they're all the same people. Although they are a history of bitterness, the Tigrayans and the Eritreans are technically, you know, ethnically the same people. Now, the other problem, of course, is that to break away, they need also a sizable economy. And that, again, is not very easy on the table. So I think for the moment, the agenda of the Tigrayans, or rather the end game, is to have a confederal Tigray, a Tigray which is part of Ethiopia, but has greater autonomy. I think that probably is where all this will lead to. There is no way in which Tigray can be part of a united, unified Ethiopia. It has to be a federal or a confederal Ethiopia. I think, which gives them the ability to have their own army, to have their own, you know, flag and everything else. So this I think is an arrangement that is provided for under the current constitution, but it is too early to actually say that the Tigrayans are fighting for secession. The Tigrayans are not at this moment fighting for secession. They are probably fighting to just survive, to have food on the table. And so, once I think you resolve this and you have a peace process, there is a possibility of Ethiopia returning to some kind of a federal and a confederal solution to these kind of problems.
طبعا حل الكونفدرالية هو على المدى الطويل إن تم تنفيذه، لكن ماذا ينهي الصراع الآن باعتقادك؟
That is an excellent question. I have very practical recommendations. One, of course, is to sideline Obasanjo. President Obasanjo has lost the confidence of the Tigrayans. He has proven to be extremely incapable of managing the negotiations. So I think the first step would be for both actors, the international community. And here I think the Emiratis especially have a lot of influence to put pressure on the AU and the external parties to create a new mediator. Once you have a new mediator who enjoys the credibility, then I think it will be important to immediately call on the parties to halt conflict, to stop the conflict. There must be no movement of troops on any party. And then you have a negotiated ceasefire. Ceasefire is not just declaration by mouth. Ceasefire is to sit down and agree on the terms of ceasefire. You also have to have a verifiable ceasefire to find out whether the ceasefire is actually working on the ground. Once that is done, then I think the two parties can begin to engage in the substantive longer-term issues progressively. But I think I will appeal to countries with leverage, especially the United Arab Emirates, which has a lot of leverage in the Horn, and not just Ethiopia, to actually use its good offices now to put pressure on the parties to stop the war and to find a path out for negotiated settlement. I think Abu Dhabi is quite capable if it tries and puts pressure.
أستاذ رشيد، شكرا جزيلا لك للمشاركة معنا في حوارات السياق.
Thank you so much.
مشاهدينا شكرا على طيب المتابعة. إلى الملتقى.